Hello, this is Mark Rieger, Managing Director at Secure Info Solutions, a North American distributor of security software, including Ardexa, a developer of tools for securely connecting industrial automation sensors to the cloud. Today, I'm joined by George Cora, Chief Executive Officer of Ardexa. Before we get started, let's review some quick background information. George, prior to founding Ardexa, you were CEO of another security software company by the name of Intersect Alliance, developer of snare agents for IT security event log monitoring. While snare agents were used to monitor IT security events on Windows and Linux servers, Ardexa agents apply IT security principles to monitor and control operational technology in industrial applications, including hydroelectricity, solar, industrial automation, and manufacturing process control. How have your experiences with the snare agent helped in the development of Ardexa's security solution for the industrial Internet of Things?
That's a great question, Mark. The snare agents were developed for a very specific task. That task was to collect events from servers or workstations, being in Linux or Windows. And I think that they're still great, to do that job. But when we developed this technology for the Internet of Things, we realized that we needed an agent to do a lot more than just collect logs. It needed to have remote control, file transfers, to schedule tasks, to handle security, certificates and that sort of thing. So it gave us a great, developing the snare tools gave us a great background. It taught us about how to do things, what not to do, from a principle point of view. But really, when we designed this technology, the Ardexa agent and the cloud that we'll talk about, we started from scratch and we said, okay, well, we've got to really use new tools, new processes, new methods, new compilers and code and all the rest of it. It's a very different technology, but we certainly learned a lot from the snare tool set. Yeah.
Thank you, George. To illustrate the differences between IT security and operational technology, or OT security, I'd like to refer to a book by Ed Colbert and Alexander Kott entitled Cybersecurity of SCADA and Other Industrial Control Systems. I've extracted a table from their book where they describe some of the critical security issues faced in operational technology. George, could you address some of the more important security shortfalls in operational technology and talk about how you have addressed them with Ardexa's Internet of Things solution? I'm particularly interested in access control and authentication. Where other IoT offerings use passwords, Ardexa's solution utilizes an entirely different approach.
Yeah, sure, Mark. Well, what I'll do is I'll start off in the middle of that table where you've got identify and authentication. Like you said, a lot of the solutions out there use passwords, and passwords are good for humans to use, but they're pretty weak and ineffective for machines to use. That's why in the Ardexa agent, and I'll describe the infrastructure in a minute, in our agent and the cloud, we use digital certificates. We use it at the device level and at the cloud level. The beauty about certificates is that they require very little work, but they can be revoked if compromised, and each device has its own unique certificate. The problem with passwords is that people tend to put one password for many devices, and if one device is compromised, then you really have to declare all the devices compromised if it shares the same security credentials. That's a significant weakness. Using certificates, I mean, we use TLS. The TLS is a successor to OpenSSL. When we use TLS to manage the certificates, every time the agent makes a connection to the cloud, it's encrypted before the authentication takes place. So there's every part of the identification authentication process is open. We use open standards, and we use certificates, which can be revoked. We can also change the system. So someone has a requirement to, I think our certificates last for 2 years, or 1 or 2 years, depending on where, how it's used. But we can adjust that. So if someone has a very high security requirement, we can make a certificate last 2 months. We can extend it out to 10 years, depending on your requirements. But as I said again, we don't use passwords, so we don't have to rely on someone going out there and changing the password or knowing what the password is for this device. It's handled. It's unique to each device. It can be handled at the device level, but it can also be handled at the cloud level, and I'll explain more of that later. And just to briefly point some of the issues that we handle and what we do about some of the issues in that table. I start with the top, the access control. You know, in our infrastructure, everything's a message. When we put an IoT device out in an industrial area, whether that's a wind park or a solar station, these devices, the device being a wind tower, wind turbine, or a hydro turbine, they don't have any access control. They don't have security at all, really. So we provide security at the message level because everything that we do is treated as a message. That's data coming from the device, whether you're remote controlling by command line, you know, you're controlling a Windows or Linux machine, but everything is treated as a message, which means that we can allow specific people or groups, what we call organizations, to have access to certain functions of that. So we mirror what happens in an operating system where you can read and write or manage resources on there. And that's to provide some sort of security and access control in situations that have none. And this is really important because I think this is a big part coming up in IoT where you know, there's a lot of people that will tell you that there's a lot of serious problems coming up because you're now putting something, you know, like a big machine that doesn't have any security, you're putting it on the internet. You've got to be careful how you do that. Auditing and accountability, obviously from our cloud perspective, we can audit what goes on, down to the exact command that was issued by who at what time. We can also put full audit trails on you know, the devices that we put out there. Again, we put devices, it could be a Linux device or it could be a Windows device. Configuration management, because again, the way we handle our cloud, and I'll talk about the infrastructure in a minute, and the way our device, our agent is configured, we can allow very strict control over configurations. And as I said before, we can control who undertakes them and to which machines. Taking a configuration snapshot is always limited by the embedded system. So for example, if I've got a solar station out there, it might be controlled by 20 inverters. I can't control, you know, some manufacturers don't let me control the configuration of those inverters. It has to be done manually or by a specialized device. So it's limited what can be done to do that. But other times you can. Other times you can take a snapshot of how it's configured and call that back to the cloud so someone can look at it. Or more importantly, someone can say, okay, well, the configuration has changed from the last time I took a snapshot. So we can certainly do that aspect of it. System and communication protection goes hand in hand with what I talked about with identification and authentication, where we use open algorithms, open standards for communication for encryption. This is very important. You can't be in this game inventing your own encryption algorithms. You have to use the stuff that's you know, that's open and known. So everything that we do at every level, we try to keep it as open as possible. That includes access to the data, by the way. So, you know, we don't try to keep it with you know, special Ardexa protocols. That's not the case. We don't do that. So the other thing I'll mention about the system and communication protection now, and I'll mention it again later, is that we don't offer services on the device itself. There are no services open. The agent on the device initiates the communication to the cloud, and in that communication there's a bidirectional channel set up, which means that I don't have to open a firewall on the device, which means that for all intents and purposes the device is invisible on the internet. That's unless someone else wants to open up a service, but we don't recommend that. What this means is very, very hard from the internet, you know, unless you've got our cloud, it's very, very hard to access that to find that device. And it also means that other things like a distributed denial of service attack can't happen because you can't really find that device. And we don't care what IP address it's got. It doesn't matter, you know. There's some solutions out there, you've got to set a specific IP address. It's not going to work in this day and age. So, and the last one is the system integrity. You know, as I said before, some of the devices allow us to take a snapshot of the configuration, therefore we can see how it's changed, others cannot, but we try to make every effort to allow people to do this. Configuration control and system integrity, a big part of it, but again, it may be limited by the device functionality. So I think that gives you a good round out of what we do in reference to that table, Mark.
Very good. Thank you, George. George, you prepared an architectural diagram of Ardexa's solution for secure communication, command, and control in industrial automation. If you would, please use this diagram to elaborate on how Ardexa works.
So I was talking about the agent before. I'm just going to briefly do an overview. The agent is that diagram on the left, the green hexagons, and that agent is I think it's about 4 megabyte binary now, or probably less, that sits on, as I say down in that note down there, it's a precompiled Linux and Windows binary. It comes packaged up with the certificates in there. So you just have to literally run one command to actually install the agent. Once that's done, it initiates the connection to that blue hexagon, the Ardexa Secure Message Queue. Now notice there's a bidirectional arrow. As I said, the agent initiates the connection and you have a connection back to the agent. So whilst it looks like on the diagram I'm punching a hole through the file, while I actually am not. It's only the diagram. But because I'm initiating the connection from the inside of the firewall, where it says Ardexa agent, there's no connection coming back. So it's actually invisible to the internet. That's very, very important. I'll come back to the agent in a minute. So everything goes to the message queue. As I said before, everything is a message. Everything is treated as a message. And then we can do two things with a message. Because it's a message queue, we can actually send it to our front end. And that's the top part. That's the part that says public cloud on the top right-hand side of that diagram. And I say and/or because we can do both, I can send it to a private cloud. Or you may just want to send it to your own private cloud. For example, there's a lot of companies that have invested a lot of money in their own IT systems, analytical systems. They might just want to, collect the messages and ingest them, or consume them, as we say, into their own IT systems. That's fine. You can do that, no problem. So a key part of Ardexa is that we don't own the data. The customer owns the data. Again, this is a very important principle because there's a lot of companies out there who see a lot of dollars in the data they collect from clients, and they treat that data as theirs, not the clients. We do the opposite. We make sure that the data is owned by the client, not us. This is very important going forward. So, as I said, we can collect to either to our front end and/or to the public private cloud. Let's go back to the agent for a minute. What does the agent do? What do I need an agent? Well, I'm collecting from all sorts of things on the agent. I might be talking to an inverter or a hydro station. I might be talking to a temperature device or a compressor. These are what we call plugins to interface to talk to something. For example, talk to some inverters or compressors, you can talk to them via Bluetooth. To talk to some other devices, you talk to them via Wi-Fi. Some of the inverters that we talk to and other control devices, you might be talking to them RS485, which is 2 bits of wire coming out of a serial link out of a Windows or Linux box. So there's various ways of talking to these things, and that's why the agent acts as the interface between the device and the Linux computer, the agent itself. All those little hexagons that you see around the word Ardexa agent is the functionality, the broad. There's a lot more functionality that you don't see there, but it's actually the broad functionality is, we allow full remote control, so you can actually send commands to a single device or to a group of devices. And when I say commands, any Windows or Linux command. You can monitor log files. When I say log files, I don't mean one. You can monitor 100 if you want. And a log file might give you one value, or might give you, in one case we've got, I think we're coming up to 600 comma-separated values in one line. So, you can do all of that sort of stuff. Schedule commands, you might want to say, I want to run this command every minute, or every 5 minutes, or every hour, on the hour. It'll allow you to do that. Manage metadata. I'll come back to that in a minute. This is very, very important. It transfers any file types. I've been doing that in the last few weeks, transferring lots of files to all sorts of devices overseas. Very, very handy, very important, because when you've got a new version of software, you want to have that functionality. You want to be able to transfer a new version of the software out to wherever it is to fix a bug or have a new functionality, and you want to be able to do it. This is a very, very handy feature. And monitor file changes. But where we do use something like monitor file changes, we might take a photograph and we have the agent watch a certain file. And if that file changes, then it grabs that file and sends it as a message to the front end. So what that means is that something might take a photograph for you out there. It grabs that whole lot and sends it to the front end, then you can do whatever you want with it. You can display it on our dashboard or you can display it on your dashboard. Let me come back to metadata because this is very important. There's some solutions out there that the metadata says things like this particular connection on my agent device. Here I am connecting to a temperature sensor and I'm reading it every 10 seconds and something like the units are in Fahrenheit or Celsius, okay? And I might have some comments around that. And I can expect a floating point number, so something like 23.75 degrees Celsius. Some solutions manage that metadata in the cloud. The real serious problem with that is that when that device is changed over, those settings can be lost because you don't know what's happened, because that device changeover may have resulted in new sensor being placed in there that no longer measures something in Celsius, it measures it in millicelsius or Fahrenheit or something like that. That's why the cloud has access to that metadata, but the metadata is actually managed on the device itself. You can change it from the cloud if you want to. The other important thing to note is every time a reading is sent to that message queue, we've used pretty advanced message compression to actually every single message has, this is a reading from this source. It is in these units, and here's the reading. Okay, so every message will have that, and it doesn't actually add much to the message because again we've used a pretty well-known protocol, and it compresses it so that we actually have that data. So just jumping to that, where is that handy? You jump that to that Ardexa message consumer on the bottom right-hand side. If you have your own private cloud, how is that going to help you? Well, it helps you because you're consuming messages, and you don't have to know. I just got a number 23.75. What does that mean? You don't have to know what that means. All the data is there for you when you consume that message. That's really important. Otherwise, you have to get a whole table. If you don't have that metadata, you have to have a whole table telling you what this device, what this reading is about. And again, the problem with that is that changes on a weekly basis, I can assure you. And if you don't keep that table up to date, everything's out of sync. So when we designed Ardexa, we kept that in mind because we've been doing this for 10 years. And with the snare agents, we've been doing this for something approaching 20 years. So we thought about that metadata, and that's a real important part of it. So I'll just briefly touch on the other parts. If you want to use our public cloud, I think you can now use it up to 3 devices. So something, if you have 3 Windows machines or you have 3 Raspberry Pis, you can put the agent on there for free. You can consume messages. We, top right-hand corner, as you can see, we have our own message consumer. We can store billions of events. You do data mining on them. It means that you can, I think we've had up to a couple of billion events, billion that is, 1,000 million. And the query response times are still in milliseconds. So it's a pretty good data store. Now we've also got dashboards and visualizations and query tools and things like that. So, and we're coming up with a lot more functionality every week. So if you want to try it out, if you have a few Raspberry Pis or if you have some Windows machines, the Windows binary will be coming out shortly. We use it internally, but we certainly support the MIPS ARM or Intel architectures for Linux. That seems to be very popular out there. And so that's where we're at. Mark, did you have any questions around anything that I've covered?
No, very thorough, very interesting, lots of great capabilities. Thank you, George. And for our audience, that concludes our session today. If there are any questions or you'd like a free trial of Ardexa's agent and platform, please contact me at markr@secureinfosolutions.com. And stay tuned for other Secure Info Solutions webcasts in the future, including a live demonstration of Ardexa software and Ardexa customer case studies in the industrial Internet of Things. Thank you, and have a great day.